Benjamin Britten was commissioned to write the War Requiem as part of the Coventry Festival of 1962, which was going to celebrate the consecration of the new cathedral in Coventry, designed by Sir Basil Spence, replacing the medieval structure that had been destroyed by bombing in the Second World War. As such, it grows out of war, and Britten, as a lifelong pacifist, clearly saw this as his chance to make his big statement about war and the pity of war. And that fed very much into the composition process. It's dedicated indeed to 4 members of Britain's circle, 3 of whom died during the Second World War, the 4th of whom took his own life some years afterwards, but probably as a result of wartime trauma. So it's rooted in the experience of suffering and loss. And Britten conceived it right from the start, almost as a piece of ritual theatre as well as music. It's written for 3 main soloists, soprano, tenor and baritone. And it mattered that those soloists would be standing in a church that was replacing one destroyed in the war, and it mattered who they were. Each soloist was intended to represent one of the major blocks of combatants in the Second World War. So the tenor would be Peter Pears, as it always was, representing the English-speaking world. The baritone would be Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, a German, representing the Axis powers, and the soprano was intended to be Galina Vishnevskaya, a Russian, and thus representing the enormous suffering of the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front. And those 3 different nationalities would come together as part of a ceremony enacting peace and reconciliation and talking about the suffering and lamentation that flowed out of the war. Now, on the face of it, who could object to that? The answer is that the Soviet Union can object to it, because as far as the Soviet Union are concerned, this is a political gesture. And so they inform the organisers of the Coventry Festival that Madame Vishnevskaya will not get an exit visa to take part in this. And we have in the archive a photocopy of a letter that Britten sent to the Russian Ministry of Culture in 1961. 14th of December 1961, it's on Red House headed notepaper. It's a photocopy because the original is still in the archives in Moscow. My dear Mr. Stepanov, please forgive me for troubling you about the proposed visit of Madame Galina Vishnevskaya to the Coventry Festival in May 1962 in order to sing the soprano solo in the first performance of my new War Requiem. I've been very sad to hear of the letter from Mr. Shashkin, the director of Goskoncert, which is the state artists' booking agency, to the director of the Coventry Festival, indicating that this visit will unfortunately be impossible. May I ask you to reconsider this decision? This requiem is perhaps the most important work I've yet written, and the dominating soprano part has been planned from the start for Madame Vishnevskaya. Into 1962 we go. The programmes go to press. It says quite clearly soprano Galina Vishnevskaya. And it's not really until 10 days or so before the premiere is due to take place that everybody concerned realises, no, there is going to be no last-minute change of plan. And so every copy of the programme has inserted into it a little grey slip saying, additions and corrections since going to press. And among them is the soprano part will be performed by Heather Harper. And we have a couple of letters in the archive of what it was like on that first performance. And the first one comes from Reynolds Stone, the artist and engraver who was one of Britten and Pears's circle. Dear Ben, it was an extraordinary sensation to turn up at Coventry for the first time, be instantly exhilarated by the cathedral, especially John's wonderful window, and that's the vast multicoloured baptistry window designed by John Piper, yet another of the Britten and Pears circle. And then find oneself almost before drawing breath listening to your Requiem, and to be in an audience that was totally gripped from the first moment onwards. Curious how no one coughed or scuffled. The total fusion of the ancient and modern words was such that Owen's marvellous poetry, that's the poems of Wilfred Owen that form part of the text, made the Latin new, and the English became timeless like the Latin, this being the words of the Requiem Mass that are intercut with Owen's poetry. One could hardly believe that his shade, that is Owen, was not listening. There is, however, one little proviso at the bottom of Stone's letter. P.S. It would be very interesting to hear it in a slightly less resonant building. Because, of course, Coventry Cathedral is a cathedral. It's not a concert hall. By all accounts, the acoustics are quite challenging. And for this work, where you have 3 soloists, a choir, a small orchestra, and a full-size orchestra, all of those sounds having to be balanced, it was quite difficult. And Britten seems to have gone away thinking, that really is not what I was hearing in my head. However, Stone goes on to say the BBC microphones were well placed, as I've discovered from a tape that I left to be turned on in my absence. And that's interesting, because it seems as though the people who actually sat at home and listened on Radio 3 had the best seats in the house. We can bear that out by looking at the other ear-witness account, which is the sculptor Barbara Hepworth. And this letter is dated night of May the 30th, 1962. She's clearly switched off the radio and instantly picked up her biro. She writes to Dear Benjamin Britten, she doesn't know him at this stage, and produces 2 pages of detailed, well, fan letter really is the only way of putting it, that describes the experience of listening to the War Requiem. Dear Benjamin Britten, I was profoundly moved this evening listening to the War Requiem. I felt it to be a truly magnificent work and of tremendous importance to all of us, both intellectually and emotionally. The visionary quality of the balance between the finest of what is past and the understanding of the new orientation towards the future seemed to me sublime. And I think she puts her finger there on something quite crucial about the War Requiem, because it's recognisably modern, but it's not aggressively modernist. So for all of the drama that led up to the first performance, and for all of the things that were suboptimal as far as Britain was concerned about that first performance, the War Requiem is up and running. It's launched. Within the archive we hold the score that Heather Harper sang from that night, and it lists all of the subsequent performances in which she took part. The first German performance, which must have been an intense experience, performing in the Netherlands where memories of occupation would have been really fresh. There's a list that goes on and on and on, which I always think is not bad for somebody who wasn't even meant to be there in the first place. There are 50 or so performances that she takes part in the first 3 or 4 years after that premiere. It's up and running. I think the war is always there as a shadow in the minds of everybody in that generation. Benjamin Britten did not fight in the Second World War, but he undoubtedly experienced the war on the home front, and of course famously he visited Belsen very shortly after its liberation and was reduced to silence by it in terms of words, in terms of music. It undoubtedly influenced him profoundly, and certainly when you listen to the War Requiem there isn't a massive amount of hope there, and that's perhaps the only choice you've got.